Okay, everybody. Today we will start the most important, most powerful system of your body, which is the nervous system. You know already that two systems belong to the control systems of the body, right? Nervous and endocrine. And therefore, nervous system is an important system, the most important system of your body. Now, in today's lecture, first I'll talk about the functions of this system, then classification or division of the nervous system, then we'll talk about different types of cells present in the nervous system or neural tissue. Then we'll talk about those two types of cells. There are two types of cells in neural tissue or nervous tissue. One type of cells are called neuroglia. These are the supporting cells, and the main cells are called the neurons. You have heard, I believe, all of you, neurons. So neurons are the main cells, and neuroglial cells or neuroglia are the supporting cells. So we'll talk about both. We'll talk about neuroglia and their functions. We'll talk about the neurons, parts of a neuron, different types of neuron and functions. Then we'll talk about few other structures. Those are very often we see inside the nervous system. What are those? Those are tracts, nuclei, gray matter, white matter. If you cut the brain or spinal cord, you will see those structures inside. So we'll see what are those structures inside the nervous system. Then we'll talk about the reflex and the pathway of reflex, which is called the reflex arc. So those are the things we'll go over. First, the functions of the nervous system. You know that your nervous system performs many functions, hundreds or even thousands, but we can divide all those functions into three types or groups of functions. What are those? Sensory input, integration, and motor output. So we can group or divide all those functions of your nervous system into three: sensory input, integration, and motor output. Let me give you an example of those three. If something touches your skin, okay, that signal, touch signal, goes from the skin to the brain, right? Goes from the skin where? To the brain. And that is called sensory input. Touch is sensation. You all know that, right? Touch is one type of sensation. So that sensation from the skin goes where? To the brain. Make sense? Brain receives that signal and interprets. Now you tell me what kind of interpretation your brain is doing in this case. If you get touched by something, your brain will interpret that signal, right? Will decide what kind of touch is that, right? Is it cold or hot? Make sense? Is it harmful or not? Right? Should you respond to that touch or not, right? All those things are processed where? In the brain. You all know that, right? So that is the integration occurs in the central nervous system, in the brain and the spinal cord. Interpretation, analysis, right? And response. So all those belong to integration. And then what happens? Your central nervous system sends signal. That is the motor output. Now, if something very hot touches your skin, that signal will go to your brain, and brain will decide what? This can harm you, right? Can burn your skin. So brain will send signal to the where? To move the hand away, muscle, right? So brain is now sending command. Is it clear? To the muscles. Because the skin cannot move the hand away, right? To move the hand away, your muscles must act. Is it clear? So brain will send signal not to the skin, sending to the muscle to move the hand away. That is the motor output. Is it clear? So sensory input, integration, and motor command. So those are the three types of functions your nervous system performs. Let me give you another example. You can give hundreds of examples. If you see you are hungry, you see some delicious food, right? Sensory input goes to the eye, right? In your retina, you have the photoreceptors, you know that, right? So the picture will not go through the skin, it will go through what? The eye. Is it clear? So your eye has the receptors, photoreceptors to pick the signal, right? And eye will send the signal where? To the brain. Is it clear? So that is sensory input from the eye to the brain. And then brain will do what? Brain will interpret, right? What kind of food is that? Is it delicious or not, right? Looks delicious or not? Should you eat or not? All those things, right? And that is the integration in the central nervous system. And then now you see, interesting thing, brain will send signal, motor command, to two different ways. Brain can send the motor command. One is immediate. When you are hungry, you see the delicious food, brain will send signal to your salivary gland or gastric gland, right? And immediately what happens? Secretion occurs, right? Do you have any control on that? What do you think? No control, because salivary secretion will occur automatically, right? Involuntarily. So that signal is going from the brain to the glands. Is it clear? Salivary gland, gastric gland to the stomach, secretion will occur, right? That is involuntary, autonomic. Now, if brain thinks that you should eat it, right? Brain will send signal where? To the muscle of your hand, right? And you will move your hand to the food to grab it. Is it clear? Is that voluntary or involuntary? This one. Voluntary, right? If you decide, no, even if it's delicious, I won't eat, you don't need to, right? If you decide, you will move your hand. Make sense? So, you see, in this case, brain is sending signal, motor output in two pathways. Is it clear? One is involuntary to the gland, secretion will occur in the mouth or stomach, and brain can send signal that is voluntary to the muscle to move the hand. Is it clear? So you see that motor command could be either or both, involuntary and voluntary. So those are three types of functions your nervous system performs. This is another example, very similar to that I said. If you are thirsty, look for water. Then if you see a glass of water, right, that signal goes from the eye to the brain, right? The picture from the eye to the brain, that's the sensory input. Is it clear? So the signal going towards the central nervous system is sensory. Is it clear? And then in this case, your brain will interpret that picture. Now what your brain will do? Just think simple. Your brain will think, is it water or acid or something else, right? Because they might look very similar. So what is that? Is it water? First thing, right? Then your brain quickly, you see so many things your brain is doing very fast, processing. Is it water or not? Is it dirty or clean, right? What's the shape and size of that glass that you have to grab, because you have to grab it, right? So you have to measure that shape and size. Is it clear? So all those things your brain is doing very fast, quickly. And how far the glass is, you have to measure that. Your brain has to measure that, right? So it's all those things your brain is doing very fast. That's the integration. And then motor command goes to the muscles of the hand to move and grab the glass, right? So that's the motor command. So this is just another example, and you see the picture Now, divisions of the nervous system. We divide the nervous system into two divisions: central nervous system or CNS, central nervous system or CNS, and peripheral nervous system or PNS. Central nervous system consists of two organs: your brain and the spinal cord. So these two organs belong to CNS, brain and the spinal cord. And peripheral nervous system consists of the nerves. You have many nerves, right, in your body. So the nerves belong to PNS. Now, I hope you are not copying the PowerPoint because you have the PowerPoint. You don't need to copy, it's already there. Okay, so central nervous system or CNS includes which two organs? Brain and the spinal cord. And peripheral nervous system or PNS includes which structures? The nerves. Many nerves you have, right, in your body. So that is first division. Now, the central nervous system receives the signal from outside. You remember, if something touches you, that goes to the central nervous system and does the integration, interpretation, and sends motor command to the effector organ, for example muscles or glands. And peripheral nervous system carries the signal towards or away from the central nervous system. So central nervous system receives the signal and sends motor command after interpretation and integration. Peripheral nervous system carries the signal towards the central nervous system or away from the central nervous system. Now, this is the brain and this is the spinal cord. So these are two organs belong to the CNS, brain and the spinal cord. Now, the nerves. These are the nerves. So there are two types of nerves in peripheral nervous system. You see, those nerves are attached to the spinal cord. Those are called the spinal nerves, attached to the spinal cord. And those nerves are attached to the brain. Those are called the cranial nerves. So these are the spinal nerves, spinal, and these are attached to the brain, so these are the cranial. You know, this is the cranial cavity. So those nerves go to the cranial cavity, get attached to the brain. Those are the cranial nerves, right? So the peripheral nervous system could be divided into two types of nerves. Okay, cranial nerves and spinal nerves. Okay. Now, functionally, these nerves could be two types. Some nerves take the signal towards the brain or central nervous system, towards the brain or the spinal cord. So these are some nerves that take towards the central nervous system. Some nerves take the signal out from the central nervous system. That means the opposite way. You see here, these are taking towards the central nervous system, that means brain and the spinal cord, and your brain will interpret that and send motor command through these nerves, taking the signal out. So, those nerves taking the signal towards, those are called the sensory nerves, and those are taking the signal out, those are the motor nerves. We have already talked about that. These are the motor. So you see, the nerves could be two types, sensory and motor. So we can, that's the functional division. This is structure where it is attached to, and functional is sensory and motor. Those are taking signal towards the CNS, those are sensory, those are taking the signal out from the central nervous system, those are motor. And you already know, you remember first I mentioned what? Touch, going towards the central nervous system, right? That signal. So that is what? Sensory. And then brain sends the motor command to the muscle, right? That's the motor. So getting out from the central nervous system. Now, you must remember, I also mentioned that motor, you remember motor could go to the glands or muscles, right? Remember that? And the motor that goes to the glands is voluntary or involuntary? Involuntary, right? Secretion will not listen to you. It will occur. That is involuntary or autonomic. And it can also be what? Voluntary, if you decide to move your hand, right? So now I can do what? I can say that motor could be two types, autonomic, that means involuntary, right, and voluntary, that is called somatic, which is voluntary. Okay, voluntary. So motor command could be involuntary or autonomic, and somatic, which is voluntary. Somatic means muscles or joints or bones. So we move those voluntarily. So that's why somatic. Okay. Now you tell me, if you see something scary suddenly, okay, what happens in your body? Heart rate goes up, right? So your brain, first what happens? The signal, sensory input goes from the eye to the brain, right? Because you are looking something. So that is sensory input, make sense? And your brain sends signal to the heart, right? And increases the heartbeat, makes the heart fast. So that motor output going from the brain to the heart is voluntary or involuntary? Involuntary. Your heart is controlled involuntarily, right? You don't control it. Okay? So that happens due to autonomic nervous system activation. Autonomic. Okay? Involuntary. Now, if you are in very relaxed condition, resting, lying on couch and watching beautiful things, right? So that is different, right? In that case, your heart rate will go down, your blood pressure will go down. Make sense? If it is scary, your heart rate will go up, right? If it is comforting, very relaxing, your heart rate, blood pressure goes what? Down. So opposite, right? But both are autonomic. You are not doing. So now you see that autonomic motor could be two types. Sympathetic and parasympathetic. P-A-R-A, parasympathetic. Sympathetic increases the heart rate, blood pressure. That means when you get excited. Excitation activates sympathetic division of autonomic nerve, and parasympathetic when you are in resting condition, relaxed condition, okay, that activates the parasympathetic nerves. So autonomic can work through two types of nerves: sympathetic, that causes excitation, releases adrenaline, noradrenaline, those chemicals in the body, increases the heart rate, right? Increases the blood pressure, and parasympathetic decreases the heart rate, blood pressure. So just know that autonomic could be two types: sympathetic and parasympathetic, and opposite actions. Okay.
Is there a chemical that's the parasympathetic?
Acetylcholine, ACH on the heart, that also reduces the heart rate. Okay. Adrenaline does what? Have you heard adrenaline? Increases the blood pressure, right? And force of contraction of heart. And acetylcholine, ACH, does opposite. Decreases the heart rate. Make sense? So adrenaline is released by sympathetic nerves and acetylcholine or GABA by parasympathetic. Okay, so that is actually the idea how we classify the nervous system. Now another thing, just know that sensory taking signal towards the central nervous system, and therefore these are also called afferent. Start with A. Arriving, afferent. And motor takes the signal out, and therefore motor is also called efferent. Exit starts with E. So efferent is also called motor, or motor is also called efferent, and sensory is also called afferent. Just remember, arriving, exiting, A, E. Make sense? Okay. Now you will understand this picture. You see, in the left side, you see the brain and the spinal cord, that is the central nervous system or CNS. In the right side, they are shown by two different colors of lines. They are showing the nerves, that means peripheral nervous system, right? So now you see two types of nerves, blue and red. By blue, they are showing sensory or afferent, and by red, they are showing motor or efferent. So that's why you see the lines, the arrow indicating blue. Under blue, you see towards the central nervous system, that is sensory or afferent, and under red, you see getting out. That means motor or efferent. Now you see the motor can go to the muscle, voluntary, you can control the movement, can go to the heart, that is involuntary, okay, or autonomic. Okay, now in the nervous system, you have two types of cells. As I have already mentioned, the main cells are called the neurons. So neurons are the main type, and neuroglia or glial cells are the supporting cells. If I ask you in one sentence, what's the function of a neuron? Just say that production and transmission of electrical signal. Actually, that's the function of nervous system. You remember in first lecture I said if I ask you what's the function of the nervous system in one sentence, generation and transmission of what kind of signal? Electrical signal. Okay, production and transmission of electrical signal. If you see a neuron, you already know how it looks like. Dendrites and axon, and this is the cell body. So, cell body, produces the electrical signal, and these processes transmit the electrical signal. Okay, so that's why production or generation and transmission of electrical signal. Neuroglial cells or supporting cells have many different types of functions, not one type, many different types of functions, because there are many different types of neuroglial cells or glial cells. We will just mention the name of few important neuroglial cells. There are more, but we will just know about few. So what are the important neuroglial cells in the neural tissue? That is one thing we'll learn, and for each type I'll mention a couple of things you have to remember. Okay, so we'll go over two things. What are different types of neuroglial cells, and one or two important information about them. Just remember those. In general, neuroglial cells help in the following important functions. Neuroglial cells, some neuroglial cells can move towards the site of injury or inflammation. If any injury occurs anywhere in the body, not anywhere, in the nervous system, any injury occurs, there are some neuroglial cells that can migrate or move towards that. Why they move? Because they can engulf the dead cells or injured cells or microorganism if there is any bacteria or virus there. So that's why they move there. Okay? So they can do phagocytosis of microorganisms or debris or dead cells. There are some neuroglial cells that can help the new cells or neurons and guide them which direction they should move. So when a new neuron is produced, there are some neuroglial cells, they will guide that newly produced neuron to particular direction. Because you know, when your brain is formed, right, the cells multiply and make the brain big, right? Cells multiply, multiplication of cells occur, and different cells should move to different direction. Is it clear? Because you have many different structures in the brain, right? Some neurons should move to this direction to form this organ part, some should move to another direction. Is it clear? To form another part of the brain. So when the brain is growing or developing, there are some neuroglial cells, they can guide the newly formed neurons to particular direction, that you go there and multiply there to produce this part. You go there, multiply there to produce this part. You know, in the brain you have cerebellum, cerebrum, right? Pons, medulla, all different structures. There are many. Control the chemical environment. Some neuroglial cells can produce neurochemicals, secrete neurochemicals, and maintain the chemical environment inside the brain. Maintaining the chemical balance in the brain is very important. Imbalance of chemicals or neurotransmitters in the brain can cause many problems. And insulation is another important function of some neuroglial cells. We'll talk about that. So what are the important neuroglial cells in the nervous system? These are few: astrocytes, microglia, ependymal cells, oligodendrocytes, satellite cells, and Schwann cells. So these are some common types of neuroglia. We'll go over these and just mention one or two important information about each type you have to remember. First, astrocytes. These neuroglial cells look like star. That's why called astrocyte. Cyte means cell. Star-like cell. You know star, right? So now this is the most common type of neuroglial cell. So number 1 looks like a star, number 2 most common type of neuroglial cells, most abundant, and number 3 the function is formation of blood-brain barrier, a very important structure in your brain that is called blood-brain barrier. Its name is telling you what is this. So inside your brain, you know, you have many capillaries, right? Everywhere in the body you have the capillaries, and inside the capillary you have the blood. You know that blood is flowing inside the capillary, and outside of the capillary you have the brain tissue, neural tissue. Now if I see one capillary in the brain, this is the capillary, you have blood here inside and neural tissue around it. So these are the neurons, okay? Now the astrocytes do what? This is one astrocyte, okay? Astrocyte forms processes. So from the body, extensions are formed, and then that process covers the capillary wall like this, going like this and covering the capillary wall. This is another astrocyte. The process going to the capillary wall and covering the capillary wall like this. So this is an extra layer around the capillary in the brain, only in the brain, not in other capillaries of the body. So now this layer is called the blood-brain barrier, between the blood and the brain tissue, the barrier, which is very important because usually the capillary wall is very porous, a lot of holes are there, right? So the chemicals can easily get out from the blood and enter into the tissue, which is needed in your body because you know that capillaries in the tissue of your body are for the exchange of nutrients, gases. So the capillary wall must be porous. But in the brain, the problem is if it is very porous, then what will happen? Some toxic chemicals can get out and cause harm to the brain tissue. Is it clear? Makes sense? So therefore, you need extra layer. So that will let the oxygen get out, nutrients get out, but not other chemicals. Make sense? Otherwise, chemicals can easily, toxic chemicals can get out and cause, because your brain tissue is extremely sensitive. Not other tissues of your body, your brain tissue. You know that. So this is an extra protection in your brain. That's the blood-brain barrier. So you now know that astrocyte forms processes and they cover the outer surface of the capillary to form the blood-brain barrier. That's what you see in the picture here. Another type of neuroglial cells are called microglia or microglial cells. These cells do phagocytosis, engulf the microorganisms or dead cells of the body. So these cells are mainly responsible for defensive function, right? Engulf the microorganisms and destroy them. So defensive cells. Ependymal cells, another type of neuroglia or neuroglial cells. These cells line the ventricles. Now the question is, what are the ventricles? Inside the brain, you have some cavities. So this is the brain. For example, this is the cavity inside the brain, pretty big, that is called lateral ventricle. So inside the brain, you have few cavities those are called the ventricles. So ventricles are the cavities filled with fluid. That fluid is called cerebrospinal fluid or CSF. Cerebrospinal fluid or CSF. Now, the wall of the ventricle is lined by the ependymal cells. So these are the ependymal cells, and they have cilia, soft hair-like structures. You see the cilia, soft hair-like structures. So these are the ependymal cells, and these are the cilia. Soft hair-like structures, and the cilia always beat like this, move like this, and that pushes the fluid inside the ventricle, cerebrospinal fluid. So the fluid is always in motion because of the movement of the cilia. Okay, so that is the function. If the fluid stays there, right, for a long time, there is a good chance that fluid, the quality of fluid will get bad, right? That's why you need to flow, move the fluid, and new fluid will be secreted, old fluid will be pushed out. So that's the function of ependymal cells. So if I ask you which cells line the ventricles of the brain, that's the ependymal type of neuroglia, and the function is by moving the cilia, they push the fluid, cerebrospinal fluid. Now, you remember insulation is another important function of the neuroglial cells. So there are three types of neuroglial cells. They form insulation around the neuron. Now all of you, I believe, know in your house where you use insulation. Electrical, right? Electrical wires, around the electrical wires, because insulation is needed because the electrical wire transmit electrical signal, right? Electricity. Nerve is like that, right? Your neuron, I showed you, transmits electrical signal. That's why you need insulation around the neuron. So these insulations are not that big. These are microscopic insulation, remember, because neurons are very small, but beautifully done. You see, one type of neuroglial cells, those are called oligodendrocytes. The cell body is round, looks like a full moon, and the processes, you see, get out from the cell body and wrap the nerve fiber. You see the yellow nerve fibers are wrapped by the process get out from the cell body. So yellow structure is the nerve fiber, and around that you see many layers. Sometimes it forms 100 layers like this, sometimes less, but that's the function of oligodendrocyte. Form sheet, that is called myelin sheet, around the nerve fibers, where you need to remember that in the central nervous system. That means in the brain and the spinal cord, not in the nerves, not in peripheral nervous system. So that's the oligodendrocyte around the nerve fibers in the central nervous system. There are two other types of neuroglial cells. They also form insulation around the peripheral nervous system, not CNS, PNS, you need to remember. So, which two form insulation in PNS? Satellite cells form insulation or covering around the cell body of peripheral neurons. And the Schwann cells form insulation around the fiber or axon. So around the cell body of neuron, satellite cells, and around the axon or fiber, same thing, the Schwann cells. So this is a neuron in peripheral nervous system. So those are a few different types of neuroglial cells and some information about each type. You need to remember. I didn't mention many things, few things you need to remember. Okay. Now, the neurons are the main type of cells in your nervous system, and the neurons are different than other cells of your body. How the neurons are different? Because they have some special characteristics or properties. What are those? Neurons are very long-lived. They can stay alive for 100 years or more. Very long life. Make sense? But I mentioned a few minutes ago, you remember, neurons are also very highly sensitive. It's kind of opposite, right? Because neurons can quickly die. Neurons can die very easily. So what's the condition of living 100 years or more? If they are not bothered. If you don't disturb them, right? They can stay alive for 100 years or more. Is it clear? But if you bother them, they will die quickly. Your brain, right? Your white blood cells are just few days. We also know that most of the cells of your brain don't multiply. Mitotic. That's what is there. So that tells you that the same cells are staying there, right, throughout the life. If you get a lesion, injury in your muscle, you know that muscle cells are formed, right? But brain cells, since they are not multiplying, we know that the same cell that you are getting in your early stage of life is there. But I told you that brain cells are also, neurons are very sensitive. They can quickly die. Example, if you can keep your brain protected, that's why you have protection. Okay? Your brain will stay alive. Now if I just open the skull, your brain tissue gets exposed to air for a few hours, it will start to die. That's why you must be very careful when you do the surgery. You cannot keep the brain exposed like other tissues of the body. Make sense? Must be very careful, because even air, exposure to air can kill the neurons. Mitotic. Most of the neurons in your body don't multiply. No division, cell division occurs in neurons. That's why called amitotic, absence of mitosis. That's why you know if stroke occurs, right? Paralysis occurs, that person usually suffers rest of the life. You can improve a little bit by, improve with muscle activities, right? But will not recover completely. Depends on continuous supply of oxygen and glucose. Your brain tissue needs continuous supply of oxygen and nutrition. Very simple, you know that. If I stop, like press here and stop circulation to my hand, couple of minutes, after I release, blood will start to go there, right? You will see your hand functioning normal. Now if I stop your circulation to the brain, pressing here for 2 minutes, what will happen? Yeah, you know that, right? The brain can die quickly if you stop giving oxygen and nutrition, right? It's very simple. So brain, you will get unconscious or you may even die. So continuously blood should go and give oxygen and nutrition to the brain. Electrical signal transmission is a property. Parts of a neuron. If you see a neuron, it has different parts, the cell body and the processes. So first we'll see, this is the cell body, and this is one long single process that is called the axon. This is the nucleus in the cell body. And these short branching processes are called what? Dendrites. Okay. Now, one thing to remember, that dendrites bring the signal into the cell body, and axon takes the signal out from the cell body. So it is always unidirectional this way. Dendrites bring into the cell body, and axon takes the signal out from the cell body. Inside the cell body, you have the nucleus, and you will also see in the cytoplasm you have dark granules. These are called missile granules. Highly concentrated ribosomes. In normal cell you have the ribosomes. Highly concentrated ribosomes. So, missile granules. NISSLS. Missile granules. Let's say missile granules. So the main function is synthesis of protein synthesis. Missile granules. Ribosomes do what? Manufacturing protein, right? So similar function. Okay. The area where the axon starts, this part of the cell body from where the axon arises, that is called hillock. Okay, hillock. And the end of the axon divides, and these are called axon terminal. You know that. Axon terminals, like this. And around the axon, you have myelin sheath. That insulation you must remember. So the axon is covered by Schwann cells. So these are the actually Schwann cells that cover the axon. So cells form insulation, that is called myelin sheath. S-E-H-E-A-T-H, myelin sheath. Okay. Okay. Now, you see around the axon you have those Schwann cells form the insulation, and that insulation or sheath is called the myelin sheath. Another thing is the space in between the Schwann cells. You see, there are some open spots, not covered, uncovered spots. For example, here, between two myelin sheath, between two Schwann cells. This part is also uncovered. This part is uncovered. So these open spots are called nodes of Ranvier. Nodes of Ranvier. So you see the spots, uncovered spots. Now, You remember I mentioned the signal, electrical signal goes this way to the cell body, then cell body processes that signal and then signal gets out this way and arrives at axon terminal. So this is the axon terminal and here is the next neuron. The neurons are connected this way. One neuron is connected to the next this way. These are the dendrites of next neuron and you see the axon terminal of previous neuron gives signal to the dendrite of next neuron because these are the dendrites, cell body, axon. Right? So dendrites of next neuron receives the signal from the axon terminal of previous neuron. And here you see there is a space. Neurotransmitters work. So the neurotransmitters are released here and that takes the signal from axon terminal to the dendrite of next neuron. Neurotransmitters here could be two types, excitatory or inhibitory. Some neurotransmitters in some locations are excitatory, for example glutamate. Some are inhibitory like GABA or ACH. Anyway, so just know that the axon terminal is not directly attached to the dendrite. There is a gap and this is called neuron to neuron synapse. Previously, you must remember when we talked about muscle contraction, I told you there is a muscle here and this is the synapse that is called neuromuscular junction. This is the synapse between the nerve and the muscle fiber. This is one type of synapse. When neuron talks to another neuron, this is the synapse, neuron to neuron synapse. So synapse could be two types, neuron to muscle, neuron to neuron. And then dendrites bring the signal to the cell body and axon takes the signal out. Then another neuron here, dendrites, axon. Okay. So that's how the electrical signal, okay, is transmitted from one neuron to another. Why this is important? You remember I said if I touch your skin, that signal will travel to the brain, right? Long way, isn't it? It's a long way. One neuron cannot take the signal all the way, right? So it is like a relay race. You are giving signal to next group of neurons, they will take it up to certain distance, right? And will give it to another group of neurons. That's why relay occurs and finally the signal will go to the far distance. Okay. Inside the nervous system, we see few things. We see gray matter, white matter, nuclei, and tracts. So we'll see what are those. If you cut the brain or the spinal cord, what you will see two distinct areas. If I cut the brain, this is the brain. If I cut it, I'll see the outer part looks gray. Okay, and inner part is white, kind of whitish. So in the brain, inside the brain, you see the surface or outer part looks gray, that is called the gray matter. Inner part looks white, that is the white matter. Without microscope, you can see it. If you cut the brain, you will see that. Okay. The gray matter is also called cerebral cortex. If you have heard this, just know that cerebral cortex is the surface of the brain. That is the gray matter. That indicates the gray matter. Now the question is why outer part looks gray, inner part looks white. The reason is the neurons, the cells of the brain or nervous system, the cell body of neurons. These are the neurons, dendrite. All these are neurons. These are the dendrites. And the axons. These are the axons. Long, right? Now what happens, you know that inside the cell body you have missile granules. And missile granules are kind of dark gray color. That's why when you see this part, many cell bodies are in this part, outer part. And inside the cell body you have the missile granules in the cytoplasm. That's why this part looks gray. Now, the axons have myelin sheath, you remember, the insulation. And the myelin sheath is white. Since you have all the axons in this part and they are covered by myelin sheath, white covering, insulation, that's why this part looks white. Okay, so that's the reason. So if I ask you in the gray matter, what you will find? You will find the cell bodies, right? All the cell bodies and dendrites. In the white matter, myelinated fibers or axons are there. That's why. Another thing is in certain areas inside the brain, you will find the, for example, in these two locations or spots, you will see it is much grayer than rest part. Why? Inside these structures, you also have the cell bodies, but very densely present, packed, very densely packed, and that's why this area looks even more grayer. And these structures are called nuclei. So inside the brain, you have some deep gray colored structures. Okay. Also, in some areas inside the brain, you'll see the myelinated fibers are heavily packed. So, like for example, in this area is different than this. Here you have myelinated fibers, but here you have more densely packed, and that is called a tract. So, by looking the color, you can tell that here it's more what? That means more fibers are bundled or packed. Make sense? The color will be slightly different. So, the tract will be more whiter because we have more myelin sheath, more fibers, right? So, yeah. So we can clearly actually see if you cut the spinal cord or cut the brain, you can clearly see those structures even without microscope, and that's the reason. Okay. So that is the central nervous system. Three types of neurons are present in the nervous system: unipolar, bipolar, multipolar. Most of the neurons are multipolar. When I draw a neuron, I draw a multipolar neuron because most of the neurons are multipolar. That's the typical. Why this is called multipolar? Because very simple. You see, multiple processes. This one is a multipolar neuron because it has axon, single axon, but multiple dendrites. That's why this is multipolar. Now another neuron, this one. You see, this one has only one axon and only one dendrite. That means two. single axon, single dendrite. That's why this is called bipolar. Okay. There is another type of neuron. This is the cell body, and no dendrite, only one axon. Actually, this is a single axon, but cell body is not attached to the end of the axon. Axon is attached this way. This is a single axon, but cell body is attached somewhere with the axon, not at the end. That's why you may get confused that two axons or two processes. No, this is a single axon, no dendrite, and the cell body is attached to the side of the axon. This is unipolar. Unipolar. Only a single axon. Okay. Unipolar is also called pseudo-unipolar. This picture is showing first two, you see multipolar, many dendrites. Then second two are showing one axon, one dendrite. Now remember, when you see bipolar, the dendrite, although this is a single dendrite, could have many branches. It's like a tree. If I ask you how many trees are there, what do you see? Do you count the branches? Or no? You don't count the branches. You count what? The trunk, right? The stem that's getting out from the ground, right? So this one has only one dendrite. These are the branches. So we won't count this. Okay. So one dendrite, one axon, bipolar. And last one is the unipolar because that's the only axon. Synapse, I have already mentioned, you remember a few minutes ago. In last class, you have learned that axon terminal ends on the muscle fiber, that's the neuromuscular junction. Neuromuscular junction, you have learned that. So this is one type of synapse. Another is, I showed you today, the axon terminal, and this is next neuron, right? And dendrites here. So this is another type of synapse. This is called neuron to neuron synapse. So neuromuscular, neuron to muscle, and neuron to neuron. These are two types of synapses. Is it clear? When nerve or neuron wants to talk to the muscle fiber, that's the neuromuscular, neuron to muscle. When signal is transmitted from one nerve to another nerve, right? One neuron to another neuron, that's the neuron to neuron. In both synapses, neurotransmitters are released. Here, in neuron to muscle, which neurotransmitter is released? Which one? ACH, right? You remember, that's the only one I mentioned. Here, excitatory inhibitory, right? If that signal should be delayed here, which one should be released here? Inhibitory, makes sense? If the signal should go very fast, enhanced, excitatory, makes sense? That's why we have two types of neurotransmitters. Some signals should be delayed, some should be enhanced. Make sense? Not difficult. Right. Reflex. Reflex is the response, rapid autonomic response to a stimulus. Now, if I put flashlight on your eye, your pupil does what? Constricts, right? You all know that. If I put flashlight, pupil constricts, right? You don't do that. It happens involuntarily, right? By itself. Autonomic response. Is it clear? So to be a reflex, the response must be what? Voluntary or involuntary? Involuntary. Is it clear? Number one. Number two, should be very fast. The response should be what? Fast, immediate. And if I present, this is number 3 condition. So there are 3 conditions. Number 1 is response must be what? Rapid. I said involuntary first, right? Then rapid. And number 3 condition is what? If I present the stimulus again and again, the response should be same, not opposite. Okay? Every time it should respond what? Same. Is it clear? Every time I put flashlight, your people should do what? Constrict every time, right? It's not like one time it will constrict and then next is dilate. No, that's not right. Okay? So that's the reflex. So the response should be rapid, quick, involuntary or autonomic, and repeated. Same response every time you present the stimulus. Should repeat, right? Same. So those are the 3. Now, another example of reflex you have already, you know that patellar ligament here, right? If I hit with hammer here, your leg kicks forward, right? So that is a reflex because you have the receptors here, pressure receptors. Every time I hit, okay, those receptors are activated by that tapping. You have the ligament here, patellar ligament, and that sends signal to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord processes that and quickly sends signal to the muscle. Without muscle you won't be able to move, right? You don't do that, but nothing will move without the muscle. So you see that you hit here, that signal goes to the spinal cord, and then spinal cord sends signal to the muscle to move the leg forward. Is it clear? So the reflex has 5 components. This is the leg. We have the ligament here. Okay, patellar ligament. You don't like my picture? Okay, yes. So this is the patellar ligament. You have the receptors here. This is the spinal cord. Spinal cord. So from the receptor, signal goes to the spinal cord. Okay, first goes to the back of the spinal cord, then comes to the front, and from there, the signal goes to the muscle of your leg. Okay, so this is the way. Receptors send signal to the spinal cord, which is a part of central nervous system. Then after processing, the motor neuron takes the signal to the muscle. Here you have the leg muscles. Okay, to move the leg, kick the leg forward. So you see the 5 components of the reflex are receptors, sensory neurons, integration in central nervous system, motor neurons, and the effector. Muscle is the effector. Okay. So this complete pathway is called the reflex arc. Complete pathway is called the reflex arc. Okay. From here to here. Make sense? So just remember those 3 things.